The invasion of the Aleutian Islands during World War II marked a pivotal moment in the history of the Alaska Natives and their remarkable contribution to the defense of the United States. Far removed from the traditional battlefronts of Europe and the Pacific, the icy, treacherous terrain of Alaska became the stage for a lesser-known, yet crucial conflict. On one side, the Imperial Japanese Army sought to expand its influence by seizing the strategic Aleutian Islands. On the other, a group of unlikely heroes, the Alaska Natives, rose to the occasion to defend their homeland. These were ordinary men, called to extraordinary service as part of the Alaska Territorial Guard, a force created under extraordinary circumstances. In the summer of 1942, the Japanese raids on the Aleutian Islands of Kiska and Attu sent shockwaves throughout the American military command. The attack was not just a tactical maneuver by the Japanese. It was a direct assault on American soil, the first since the War of 1812. For the first time in over a century, the United States found itself facing a foreign occupation on its own territory. This event underscored the vulnerability of Alaska, a remote yet strategically significant frontier that was crucial in the broader Pacific theater of war. The situation was dire. At the time, the U.S. military presence in Alaska was staggeringly small. Only around 2,000 American soldiers were stationed across the vast and rugged expanse of the territory. To make matters worse, the U.S. Army had withdrawn most of the Alaska National Guard units in 1941, redeploying them to Washington state as the threat of war loomed elsewhere. The result was an alarming lack of military protection in a region that had suddenly become a key battleground. This gap in defense, combined with the Japanese invasion, triggered a profound sense of urgency in both the U.S. government and the local population. In response, the Alaska Territorial Guard was born. Formed in 1942, it was a grassroots defense force composed largely of Alaska Natives, many of whom volunteered their services without expectation of pay or recognition. They came from diverse backgrounds: Inupiat, Yupik, Aleut, and others. People who had lived off the land for centuries and knew its every harsh contour. For these soldiers, the war was deeply personal. It wasn't just about fighting an enemy. It was about protecting their homes, their families, and their way of life from an unprecedented threat. Numbering around 6,300 strong, the Alaska Territorial Guard played a critical role in the defense of the territory. Their knowledge of the landscape made them invaluable assets to the U.S. military, which was ill-prepared for the challenges of Alaska's unforgiving environment. They patrolled the coastline, gathering intelligence on Japanese activities, and served as scouts, navigating through treacherous terrain that would have been impassable for regular troops. In many ways, these men became the eyes and ears of the American military in Alaska, providing vital information and helping to ensure that the Japanese could not gain a further foothold on U.S. soil. Their contributions were particularly significant during the Aleutian Islands Campaign, a series of battles that sought to reclaim the Japanese-occupied islands. The campaign itself was a brutal affair, fought in some of the most challenging conditions of the entire war. The fog-choked waters of the Bering Sea, combined with freezing temperatures and treacherous mountains, made logistics a nightmare for both sides. For the soldiers of the Alaska Territorial Guard, however, this was familiar ground. Their resilience and adaptability in such extreme conditions gave the Allied forces a crucial edge. As the campaign unfolded, the contributions of the Alaska Territorial Guard became increasingly apparent. Their bravery was on full display during the liberation of Attu in May 1943, a battle that saw some of the most intense combat of the Pacific theater. Despite the overwhelming odds, the combined efforts of the Guard and Allied troops ultimately led to the recapture of the island. The price was steep. Nearly 4,000 American soldiers were killed or wounded. But the victory was a turning point in the Pacific Campaign, and it marked the beginning of the end for Japanese ambitions in Alaska. Yet, the heroism of the Alaska Territorial Guard extends beyond their military accomplishments. Their story is one of resilience, community, and an enduring connection to their land. The Alaska natives who served were not professional soldiers. They were hunters, fishermen, and herders, men who had grown up in the rugged wilderness of Alaska. They brought to the battlefield not just a profound knowledge of their environment, but a deep sense of duty to protect it. For them, the war was not just about defeating an enemy. It was about preserving a way of life that had existed for generations. Despite their critical role, the story of the Alaska Territorial Guard has often been overlooked. In the broader narrative of World War II, these men fought without pay, without formal recognition, and without the expectation of glory. For decades after the war, their contributions remained largely forgotten by history. It wasn't until 2000, over 50 years after the war had ended, the U.S. government formally recognized the service of the Alaska Territorial Guard, granting them veteran status. This recognition was long overdue. The Alaska Territorial Guard's actions during World War II were nothing short of heroic, and their legacy continues to inspire. Their story is not just one of war. It is a story of a people's deep connection to their land, their community, and their heritage. It is a testament to the resilience of the Alaskan Native people, who, in the face of overwhelming odds, stood strong to defend their home. As we reflect on this chapter of history, it is important to remember the courage and sacrifices of the Alaska Territorial Guard. Their story reminds us that heroism comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most unlikely defenders can make the greatest difference. Their legacy lives on in the countless stories of courage, resilience, and determination that DEF welcome to another episode of Native Journals, where we uncover the untold stories of the indigenous heroes who shaped our world, i.e. the history of Native Americans in the defense of their land. One of the key reasons the Alaska Territorial Guard was so effective was their unparalleled knowledge of the Alaskan terrain. The Alaskan Native volunteers were expert hunters and trackers, skills honed over generations in some of the most extreme environments on Earth. These skills were invaluable to the U.S. military, which struggled with the logistical challenges of defending Alaska's vast, rugged, and inhospitable landscape. For the Alaskan Natives, protecting their homeland from invasion was a matter of survival, and they rose to the occasion with courage and determination. The Japanese had their own strategic reasons for targeting the Aleutian Islands. They believed that by controlling the islands, they could sever the connection between the United States and the Soviet Union, preventing any potential collaboration between the two powers in the North Pacific. The Japanese also feared that the Americans could use the Aleutians as a staging ground for future attacks through the Kuril Islands, which lay between Japan and the Soviet Union. In June 1942, the Japanese launched their invasion of the Aleutian Islands, believing that control of the islands would not only prevent an American-Soviet alliance, but also extend Japan's reach into the North Pacific. At the same time, the United States recognized the potential danger of allowing the Japanese to maintain control of the Aleutians. Military strategists feared that the islands could serve as a base for future Japanese air and naval operations against the U.S. mainland. The threat of aerial bombardments on West Coast cities like San Francisco, Seattle, and Anchorage was a growing concern, and the Japanese invasion of the Aleutians exacerbated these fears. Historians have since argued that the Japanese invasion of the Aleutians was largely a diversionary tactic. It coincided with the infamous Battle of Midway, which was one of the most decisive battles in the Pacific theater. Some believe that the Japanese invasion of the Aleutians was intended to distract the U.S. Pacific Fleet from Midway Atoll, drawing American forces away from a more critical battlefront. This diversionary tactic was orchestrated under the command of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the mastermind behind the attack on Pearl Harbor. On June 3, 1942, the Japanese made their first move in the Aleutians, launching an air raid on the U.S. naval base at Dutch Harbor in Alaska. The following day, they bombed U.S. Army facilities at Fort Mears, inflicting significant damage. 3 days later, on June 6th, the Japanese invaded Kiska Island, capturing all 10 U.S. Navy personnel stationed there. The next day, the Japanese made a more aggressive landing at Holt's Bay on Attu Island, taking 42 native Alaskans, known as Unangan, as prisoners and detaining them for questioning in a local schoolhouse. The occupation of Kiska and Attu marked the first time since the War of 1812 that American soil had been occupied by a foreign power, and it sent shockwaves across the United States. The invasion of the Aleutian Islands was a wake-up call for the U.S. military and the people of Alaska. Until that point, many Alaskans had watched the war unfold in Europe and the South Pacific from a distance, never imagining that their remote territory would become a battleground. But the Japanese invasion made it clear that Alaska was far from untouchable, and the people of the territory quickly mobilized to defend their homes. In the months that followed, the Alaska Territorial Guard, known colloquially as the Eskimo Scouts, became an essential part of the U.S. military's efforts to protect the region. Established in August 1942 by the U.S. Army, the Guard was a reserve force composed entirely of Native Alaskans, many of whom volunteered to serve without pay. Their mission was simple: to patrol Alaska's vast coastline, gather intelligence on Japanese forces, and assist in the defense of the territory. However, their contribution was far more significant than anyone could have anticipated. The Eskimo Scouts played a critical role in spotting Japanese aircraft and naval movements, and they were often the first line of defense when Japanese forces attempted to infiltrate Alaska. Their knowledge of the terrain, combined with their hunting and tracking skills, made them invaluable in locating enemy positions and preventing further incursions. As the war progressed, the Japanese made one final attempt to threaten the American mainland. In a last-ditch effort, they launched a campaign to send 9,000 balloon bombs across the Pacific, hoping to cause widespread destruction on the West Coast. The balloon bombs, carried by the jet stream, were designed to explode upon reaching the mainland, causing fires and chaos in American cities. Although most of the balloon bombs failed to reach their targets, some did make it as far as the continental United States. Once again, the Alaska Territorial Guard played a critical role in defending the homeland. They shot down many of the balloon bombs and helped to demobilize those that landed in Alaska, preventing what could have been a devastating attack on U.S. soil. The contributions of the Alaska Territorial Guard were not limited to military action. Many Alaskans also worked in defense-related industries, such as shipbuilding and aircraft construction, providing vital support to the war effort. Others volunteered their time and resources to aid the military, while thousands of Alaskans, over 10,000 in total, enlisted in the U.S. Armed Forces to defend their country. The Alaska Territorial Guard, however, remains one of the most significant and unique contributions of the Alaskan people to World War II. This civilian militia unit, formed out of necessity and composed of brave Native volunteers, demonstrated that even in the most remote and overlooked regions of the world, ordinary people could rise to the occasion and become heroes. Their legacy, much like the land they defended, endures to this day. The Alaska Territorial Guard, often referred to as Eskimo Scouts, was a military organization like no other. In 1942, as World War II raged, and the threat of Japanese invasion loomed over Alaska, this unique force was established out of necessity, pulling together 6,300 indigenous men and women aged 12 to 80. These individuals hailed from 107 different communities spread across the vast, rugged terrain of Alaska. From the coastline of the Bering Sea to the remote edges of the Arctic, they represented a mosaic of Alaska's indigenous peoples, including the Yupik, Inupiaq, Tsimshian, Haida, Athabaskan, Akrut, and Tlingit communities. The creation of the Alaska Territorial Guard was a remarkable feat of cooperation and resilience. These were not professional soldiers, but everyday people, hunters, fishers, trappers, and homemakers, who banded together to protect their homeland from the growing threat of war. Unlike conventional military units, the Guard did not discriminate by gender. Women, too, were welcomed into the ranks, defying the societal norms of the time. While most women served as nurses, a few, like Laura Belt's Wright of Haycock, took on more combat-oriented roles. Wright earned a reputation as one of the best sharpshooters in her company, standing shoulder to shoulder with the men in her unit, breaking down barriers that even the regular U.S. military had not yet overcome.